project. And for those who just joined, you'll know more about this in a few minutes. So Lindsay, kick it off, please.
All right, so thanks everyone who was just here and who's going to be hanging up, and thanks for everyone who has joined in the last 16 minutes. We appreciate your patience. We did not expect so many questions, so we will get started again. So thanks for joining us for the first public involvement meeting for Lake Drive and Shorewood. This meeting is being recorded and will be available on the project website in the coming days. My name is Lindsay Schmidt. I'm the public involvement liaison on this project. Also on the call, we have Christine Hanna, the DOT project manager, and Aaron Bubb, our consultant project manager. Leanne from the village wasn't able to join us tonight, but is part of our project team and has been all along, and she can be reached directly if you have any questions for her. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. A reminder to please mute your phone or microphones. If you have Teams or you're joining through a browser, just use the microphone icon in the upper right. We ask that you please be respectful of others and use appropriate language. We also ask that you hold your questions until the end of the 15 to 20-minute presentation. If you'd like to submit a question via the chat box, you can do so at any time. Otherwise, after the presentation, we'll open it up to questions. And in order to maintain some kind of order and make sure everyone gets a chance, we'll ask you to use the hand raise function on Teams. It's in the upper right corner of your screen and looks like a little smiley face with a hand. If you're joining via browser, you may need to click on the 3 dots and then you'll see a drop-down menu that has raise hand in there. We'll call on people one at a time who have their hand raised, ask you to unmute so you can ask your question, and then please remember to mute again. For the purpose of this meeting, out of respect for everyone's time, please try to keep your questions more general or things that would apply to the entirety of the project, maybe not just you and your property. We're happy to take those specific questions offline in a one-on-one conversation, possibly even a meeting on your property. We just want to make sure we have time to get everyone's questions in. So again, we had the presentation at 5. It ran long, so let's get right started again. I'm going to hand it over to Aaron, our consultant project manager, to walk us through the project. Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you, Lindsay. Again, I'm Aaron Bubb, and we'll start by going through the agenda here for today's meeting. There we go. So we're going to go through the project background and need, as well as the existing configuration. We're going to review the proposed alternatives and discuss the project schedule, and then take questions at the end. So the project is fully located within the village of Shorewood. The limits are Edgewood Avenue on the south end of the project and Kensington Boulevard on the north end of the project. Project length is 1.3 miles. And the posted speed is 30 miles an hour. Traffic just north of Edgewood Avenue is about 14,600 vehicles a day, and south of Kensington, it's just over 11,000 vehicles a day. The purpose and need of the project is to address the failing pavement condition. Original pavement was installed in 1952, and we want to upgrade existing municipal underground facilities. This stage in the project, we also need to consider bike and pedestrian accommodations. So the proposed improvements include a pavement construction. This is removing the existing pavement and gravel base below it, replacing the curb and gutter, improving curb ramps at intersections. This is where sidewalks meet the curb to make sure that it's ADA compliant, and again, replace combined sewer and water main in the village of Shorewood. The base construction cost estimate for replacing the existing project in kind, pulling out the pavement and doing the work stated above, is about $7 million to $7.7 million. Of this, the driving lanes for the project would be paid for with federal and state funding, 80% federal funds, 20% state funds. Although the parking lanes would be funded 80% by federal funds, 5% by state funds, and 15% by Village of Shorewood funds. So there is one alternative that affects the village cost share, and I'll point that out when we start discussing the options in more detail. Before we look at the proposed alternatives, this corridor is State Highway 32. So there's standards that apply for bicycle and pedestrian accommodations, as well as the driving lane and parking lane widths. we'll be following the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's Facilities Development Manual, which has both desirable and minimum standards, and our alternatives were developed for both. And we're also required to show options for bike accommodations. And some of these alternatives affect on-street parking, others affect existing terrace trees. These are trees located in the green space between the back of curb and the front of the sidewalk. And although there's a risk to these trees with any of the construction alternatives, the Village of Shorewood arborist believes that widening the roadway would have a negative impact on these existing trees, as their roots likely extend to the back of curb. And on other village projects where curbs have been expanded or moved out, the arborist has seen that some trees do decline quickly, while others decline slowly over 5 to 10 years. So as a designer, we may deviate from the desirable standards with strong public input, as well as considerations of impacts to the trees and parking, as well as the parkland. We have Atwater Park in the corridor and historic districts. There's 2 residential historic districts in the corridor. So in summary, we need to balance all this with the federal and state standards, and as well as with the needs of the local community and the residents. So we're here to get your input today. The next slide shows an overview of the project corridor. We see the project corridor falling into 3 segments. There's the south segment from Edgewood Avenue up to Shorewood Boulevard. There's the Capitol Drive intersection segment, which goes from Shorewood Boulevard to approximately Jarvis Street. And then there's the north segment, which goes from Jarvis to about Kensington Boulevard. So looking at this existing configuration here, this is for the north and south segments. If we dive into this typical section measures 44 feet from face of curb to face of curb. There's one 11-foot travel lane in the northbound direction and a second 11-foot travel lane in the southbound direction. On the outside, we have 11 feet, and this is shared for bike use and parking. So this is the existing configuration. Here is our terrace area that we talked about with the trees and the existing sidewalk on both sides. At the Capitol Drive intersection, if I look at that segment right here, and again, that's Shorewood Boulevard to south of Jarvis Street, today there's 4 lanes. There's 2 lanes going northbound that measure 11 feet, and there's 2 lanes that go southbound that measure 11 feet. So proposed alternatives were developed for these segments, and that's what you'll see here coming up. We'll begin with the north and south segments. Again, the north segment goes from about Jarvis Street to Kensington Boulevard, and the south segment goes from Edgewood Avenue to Shorewood Boulevard. We'll start with the 5-foot bike lane alternative. This alternative measures 44 feet from face of curb to face of curb. There's one 11-foot driving lane in the northbound direction and one 11-foot driving lane in the southbound direction. On the outside of the roadway, there is a 2-foot gutter and a 5-foot dedicated bike lane in both the southbound and northbound directions. On the outside of the roadway, there's room for one 8-foot parking lane. So the alternative here on the screen shows it on the east side of the roadway. That's because Atwater Park is located on the east side of Lake Drive. This may reduce the amount of crossing that might potentially happen at a mid-block location with parking on the west side of the road. And then with parking restrictions like there are today in the PM peak hour, it allows for situations when northbound vehicles are turning left onto the 13 side roads. It provides space for vehicles traveling through to bypass them with the parking restrictions on the outside. That said, the parking could be placed on the west side of the road instead of the east side. That would just flip this alternative 180 degrees. Digging into the specifics of this alternative, again, this is the 5-foot bike lane in the north and south segments. The road width is 44 feet, and that matches existing. There's no widening. However, there's only parking on one side of the roadway. There's dedicated 5-foot bike lanes. This is considered a desirable bike accommodation per WISDOT. We talked about those standards earlier. This is one of the desirable ones. Without widening, there'd be fewer potential tree impacts, and it does fit within that base construction cost estimate that I showed earlier of $7 to $7.7 million. So that was the 5-foot bike lane. Looking at the 12-foot shared parking bike lane, excuse me, this has one 11-foot driving lane going northbound and one, excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water here. It also has 11-foot driving lane going southbound. However, the outside lanes have been widened 1 foot to provide a shared parking bike lane. So both southbound and northbound bikes would share this parking lane. Again, this measures 46 feet from face of curb to face of curb. Looking at the specifics of this alternative, with that 46 feet, there is 1 foot of widening on each side of the roadway. However, parking is still provided on the east and west sides. Bikes do share a 12-foot parking lane. This is considered a minimum accommodation for bikes and parking when they're combined together in a constrained environment. That's when we have parklands such as Atwater Park as well as historic districts. But with that 1 foot of widening, there is a greater potential impact to trees, and it does add $130,000 to $190,000 to the base construction cost estimate that we discussed. And because this widening is in the curb lane, in the parking lane, this would be part of the project that's funded by 15% Village of Shorewood funds. So this alternative would cost the village taxpayers additional money. So this is the 12-foot shared parking bike lane alternative for the north and south segments. The final alternative would be the replace in kind alternative. This is removing everything that's there and putting it back in the same exact configuration. This measures 44 feet from face of curb to face of curb, just like existing. One 11-foot northbound lane, one 11-foot southbound lane. On the outside, 11 feet for parking and bike use. Looking at the specifics of the replace in kind alternative for the north and south segments, again, road width 44 feet. There would be no widening. Parking would be provided on the east and west sides, just like there is today. Bikes do share an 11-foot parking lane. This does not provide a bike accommodation per WISDOT. With no widening, there'd be fewer potential tree impacts, and it does fit within the base construction cost estimate. At the Capitol Drive intersection, again, this is the area between Shorewood Boulevard and just south of Jarvis Street. In this area, we have 4 alternatives. We'll start with the 5-foot bike lane. This section would measure 58 feet from face of curb to face of curb. There would be 2 11-foot driving lanes going northbound and 2 11-foot driving lanes going southbound. On the outside, we'd have a 2-foot gutter, and there'd be a 5-foot dedicated bike lane, both southbound and northbound. But you can see this is wider. We are widening into the terrace area and impacting the trees in this segment. So looking at the 5-foot bike lane at the Capitol Drive intersection, again, the road width is 58 feet. This is about 7 feet of widening on each side of the roadway. The outside driving lanes would be 11 feet wide. This does meet the minimum standards for the amount of traffic and trucks we have in the corridor. There would be dedicated 5-foot bike lanes. This is considered a desirable bike accommodation per WISDOT. However, we would have tree impacts, and we would be impacting the traffic signals at the Capitol Drive intersection. So with the signals and added pavement, this would increase the base construction cost estimate by $420,000 to $540,000. Again, this is the 5-foot bike lane at the Capitol Drive intersection. The next alternative is the 4-foot bike lane. This alternative measures 52 feet from face of curb to face of curb. There, again, are 2 11-foot driving lanes going northbound, 2 11-foot driving lanes going southbound. There's a 4-foot dedicated bike lane southbound as well as northbound. Moving on to the specifics. The road width is 42 feet with this alternative. That means there's widening of about 4 feet on each side of the roadway. The width of the outside driving lanes are 11 feet, which meets standards. There would be dedicated 4-foot bike lanes, which is considered a bike accommodation per WISDOT. We'd be impacting the trees and the traffic signals, and it would be adding about $290,000 to $350,000 to the base construction cost estimate. Moving on to the 12-foot shared driving bike lane at the Capitol Drive intersection. This has one northbound 11-foot driving lane, one 11-foot southbound driving lane, and then the outside lanes are shared. They're 12-foot wide on each side. There's a northbound and southbound lane, but here bikes would be forced to ride with live traffic with this option. So 12-foot shared driving bike lane alternative at Capitol, the road width is 46 feet. There's widening of about 1 foot on each side of the roadway. What we've seen here with the shared lanes was that it's seen that vehicles tend to drive 1 foot off the face of curb. So with that 12-foot width, if we deduct that, the effective width of the outside driving lane is only 11 feet. However, that does meet the WISDOT standards for the amount of traffic and trucks in the corridor. Bikes would be sharing that 11-foot wide driving lane. However, this does not provide a bike accommodation per WISDOT. With the widening, we'd have greater potential tree impacts. There would be no impacts to the traffic signals, though, but it would add $30,000 to $50,000 to the base construction cost estimate. This would be the 12-foot shared driving bike lane at the Capitol Drive intersection. Final option here would be the replace in kind alternative. Again, this is pulling out what's there, putting it back in the same exact configuration. Here we have one 11-foot driving lane going northbound, one 11-foot driving lane going southbound. The outside lanes in both directions are shared. It's 11-foot width for driving and bikes. This all occurs in a live lane of traffic. Again, this measures 44 feet from face of curb to face of curb. So looking at the specifics with that 44 feet, there is no widening. However, the effective width of the outside driving lane is only going to be 10 feet in this alternative. So that does not meet the WISDOT standard for a driving lane width for the amount of traffic and trucks in the corridor. Bikes share the 11-foot driving lane. This does not provide a bike accommodation per the WISDOT standards. However, there would be fewer potential tree impacts because we're working within that 44-foot footprint, no traffic signal impacts, and it fits within the base construction cost estimate. So before we finish, I want you to know that we can mix and match the various alternatives. For example, if it's determined that the 5-foot bike lane is appropriate for the south segment, doesn't mean it's the appropriate alternative for the Capitol Drive intersection or the north segment. So these alternatives can be combined or blended to complete the full project corridor. We'll also be coordinating with the City of Milwaukee on the south end of the project and Village of Whitefish Bay on the north end of the project to make sure we transition our pavement marking with projects in the neighboring community. Most of the existing sidewalk will remain. However, there will be minor sidewalk replacement, and that'll occur at curb ramps at locations where the sidewalk meets the curb at intersections. So here we need to make sure that the landings and ramps are ADA compliant, so those will be replaced. For the sewer and water work, if there's laterals going to any properties to connect those, there may need to be sidewalk that gets removed. And then with the widening options, this is showing the 5-foot bike lane at Capitol, pushing that curb out may impact sidewalk where it's close, and that may need to be replaced. So in this case, potential sidewalk replacement at Atwater Park. Looking at the sewer and water, about 2,700 lineal feet of combined sewer would be replaced south of Capitol Drive, 6,600 lineal feet of water main throughout the project limits. In addition, the Village of Shorewood is looking to replace lighting. So any street lighting, whether it's impacted or not in the terrace area, it will be replaced with new wiring conduit, new poles with LED luminaires to improve efficiency. As far as right-of-way goes, there's no relocations in the corridor. However, there could be some small strip takings of land or grading easements required for the sidewalk and curb ramp work that we just discussed on the previous slide. Other considerations to the project include curb bump outs to shorten the crossing distances for pedestrians, as well as calming traffic, as well as looking at on-street ADA parking, likely near Atwater Park. So these will be components of the project that we'll be looking at as the design progresses. There are several ways to view the exhibits. Typical sections would be posted at the Village Hall and Library. Printed plan views showing the alternatives would be at the Village Hall. But the best place to get your information is going to be from the project website. The link is on the screen. There's also a QR code here. If you want to scan it with your phone, you'll be directed to the site. So I'll leave it up for a little bit here. We're going to take recordings of this presentation, the 5 o'clock one as well as the 6:15 one. They were the same, but we'll have them both on the website, as well as a PDF of this PowerPoint. And then there'll be the exhibits on there showing the typical sections that we talked about for the north, south, and Capitol Drive segments. Those will be shown with plan view layouts. Residents will be able to zoom in on their property and see the various layouts. So think of it flying across the roadway in a helicopter, looking down, you'll be able to see the view of these different alternatives near the various parcels. Jumping ahead to the project schedule, the field survey data was collected by Kapoor in late 2020. We're currently developing the alternatives. As we refine our design, additional public meetings are anticipated. The environmental document, we talked about that earlier, is a categorical exclusion checklist, a CEC, that is planned for late 2021. I know we had questions on that earlier. 60% plan is due in 2022. Final plans are not due until May of 2024, with construction currently scheduled for 2026. So steps to identify a preferred alternative. First include developing a purpose and need for the project. We talked about that at the beginning. The purpose and need is to replace the failing pavement and install municipal underground facilities. So we need to develop alternatives that meet the purpose and need of the project. We need to assess and evaluate those and then gather input. So that's where we are right here, looking for input on the alternatives. From there, we'll identify a preferred alternative, and we'll be working with the Village of Shorewood in that selection. And then that will ultimately be documented in that categorical exclusion checklist, or CEC. So the steps for selecting the preferred alternative involve strongly considering the need for bike and pedestrian accommodations, looking at impacts, whether it's trees, parking, historic resources, or Atwater Park, costs, and public input. So as I stated at the beginning, we're here to get your feedback. We want to hear what you like, what we don't like. It's not a vote though. We're looking for general and specific comments. And there's several ways to do that. If you go to the website that we provide the link earlier, there is a link to this comment form. So you can fill out what you like, what you don't like, maybe alternatives for the different segments that you're in favor of or against. There's also a hyperlink at the bottom of this form, so it can be emailed to the project contacts. You can send it to the U.S. Postal Service as well. There's also a link to an online survey on the website, and the first screen when you open that link will be this view here. There's about 8 questions to answer. Should take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And then finally, you can ask questions via Teams by raising your hand, and Lindsay will help me call on you, or you can type a comment in the chat window. After reviewing the materials, if you have specific questions on a parcel or the project in general, you can reach out to us. Here's our contact information. It's on the screen. And I guess before we open it up to any questions, I do want to, on behalf of the project team, thank you for your participation in these meetings. At the last meeting, we did give the Village of Shorewood an opportunity to weigh in on the alternatives. I guess we will do that again.
Erin, Kathy does have her hand up. Let's see if we can get her unmuted.
Okay.
Kathy, are you able to unmute yourself? It looks like you're unmuted now, but I don't hear your voice. Yeah, we're not. You are unmuted, but we cannot hear you if you are speaking. I did put a call-in number, Kathy, in the chat if you want to try calling in from a phone. Erin, if you want to go to someone else, I'm not sure why her audio is not working. She is unmuted on our end anyway.
Lindsay's saying she's on the phone too and she can't hear. I'm going to work with Kathy until you call on someone else. Let me help Kathy.
Okay, sounds good. Erin, there was one other hand up if you want to move on, and then we'll come back to Kathy.
Okay. Tom, your hand is still up. I know you spoke last time.
So I have a further question that came up in listening to the presentation again. The bike lane, if the Department of Transportation has a preference for a bike lane, has there been any consideration of putting the bike lane on the outside of the curb without disturbing the roots of the tree? Bikes don't weigh as much as cars and trucks. You could have a thin layer of asphalt rather than disturbing tree roots and accommodate the need for a bike lane simply by putting a dip at the curb. In other words, it's almost like a sidewalk, but it would be asphalt and right next to the curb, above the curb. And then you wouldn't have to widen the curbs and disturb roots. Has that been considered? Bicycles do not weigh as much as trucks and cars.
Yes, Tom, thanks for that. I would say that is not one of the options that we presented tonight, obviously. That would be considered a multi-use path, I would say. Our experience has shown that cyclists that are proficient in what they do still prefer to use the roadway. The WIS policy does include complete streets, so that does include on-street accommodation. So that's why the alternatives were developed from a complete street standpoint. Chris Squires from DOT is the bike and ped coordinator. I'll let him unmute and weigh in on that.
Before Chris jumps on the call here, also we need to acknowledge we live in Wisconsin. So the outside, especially the gutter, we have a lot of drainage. We don't want to create ponding, and that could present some issues the bikers out there, or the cyclists, I should say. So this is one of the other reasons we should not be using the outside lane drainage.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I was just gonna say, and
if it were above the curb, it wouldn't create ponding.
Yeah. So yeah, respond, Mr. Lynn. So there is a type of bike accommodation besides the shared use path that can be located outside the curb. There's different names for it: cycle tracks or separated bike lanes. It sometimes can be at curb level. I think that you'd run into a few issues here. I think for one, you still do need to go down. It needs to be thick enough to be durable and hold up. I don't know offhand exactly how thick that asphalt would have to be, but it has to be thick enough that it'll last long term. If it's immediately adjacent to the trees, you'd have some issues with potentially having enough room for the bikes to use it safely. I think also you might run into what you see on sidewalks a lot, where the roots over time will break up the pavement or at least raise it up. So yeah, it wasn't an alternative that had been evaluated here. It is an option out there, although I don't know. I think the impacts here probably would still likely impact the trees.
I mean, I ideally would like to have it like the board said and do it the same way it is. But if the Department of Transportation insists on a bike lane, I would like them to look into that alternative because I think it would be cost effective, less expensive, and reduce the risk of damaging the trees.
And yeah, I guess the only other thing I'd say is that, you know, typically those separated lanes are at least 5 or 6 feet wide. So you'd actually, I think, be bumping up into some of your trees there, or at least you'd have some clearance issues where they'd be awfully close, or it could be a safety hazard. So in some cases, that actually would be wider than what, you know, some of the various on-road accommodations would be.
Well, and generally, just the pavement for a sidewalk or some kind of path, if it's concrete, it's about 5 inches of concrete over 4 inches of gravel. So that's 9 inches right there that you'd still be digging in that root area. You know, whether it's asphalt or concrete, you still have to dig it out and make sure it's fully compacted. So you know, there is still that potential there where you're potentially closer to the trees by doing this.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to throw it out there as an idea.
I would, related, Kathy just wrote in a comment. I'm so sorry, Kathy. I'm not sure what our issue is with your audio, but she said, have we considered a bike highway embedded in the roadway separated by a small concrete buffer if the state determines we must have dedicated bike lanes with both bike lanes northbound and southbound side by side? Just wanted to get that in since it's related to what you guys are talking about.
I guess that is not something that's currently considered. If that's something that, you know, Kathy feels strongly about, I guess I encourage her to put that down as a comment. I know those facilities generally need to have some separation from the through lanes. So I think, you know, whether you provide it on one side or both sides, you know, one consideration is going to be this is just over a 1 mile segment. So what's it going to tie into on the other side? And if the city of Milwaukee and Whitefish Bay aren't doing that, you know, what happens? What kind of situation do you have at the end of the village limits? The other thing would be you're still providing that width. So, you know, to do that, it may be at the expense of parking, or it may be at the expense of widening and affecting the trees. By having them together and providing that separation, sometimes that barrier separated, that's adding additional width then as well to separate the bike facility from the actual driving lane. So that could potentially make the facility wider. That's my initial reaction to that, but yeah, we can definitely look at that, Kathy. If
I agree with you, Aaron. I think that's going to add more constraints to what we have existing out there. So that will impact parking for sure, and also could potentially pose some safety for bikers, like leaping from one segment to the other between City of Milwaukee and Village of Whitefish Bay. So consistency between those municipalities needs to be considered for the safety of bikers and all travelers on that road. We have not considered angle parking in the front of the Atwater Park to make sure that, I'm just reading Kathy, she said, has the state considered angle parking in front of Atwater Park? If parking is eliminated on one side of the lake drive, would that be too dangerous backing out into the lake? You pretty much answer your own question, Kathy. Yes, if we answer that, we have extremely tight widths on that roadway from face to face of curb. So if we put it on angle, we need extra widths for cars to back up into the traveling lane, and it will create some safety concerns. So no, we're not considering this at this point. Yes.
Well, and to weigh in on that further, Christine, I believe the state municipal agreement that the village signed with the state, one of the conditions is that they would prohibit or not allow any angle parking on the roadway.
Oh, there you go. And like Lindsay mentioned here, I look at the chat box. we are very early to deliver this project or make any determination. We're just sharing preliminary thoughts until 2026 construction. So if the village would like to push it any further, I personally would not recommend that, but if this is the village wish, just let us know, send me an email, and we'll do so.
Thanks,
Aaron, you've got a,
Christine.
oh, I'm sorry. Aaron, you've got a couple of other hands up if you want to.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. I appreciate that. Nina, I see a hand up. Your turn.
Hi, actually Mike Farrow speaking. I appreciate the presentation. It seems like this has been really well thought out. I just was kind of had a question about how the Department of Transportation balances the impact of, reduced parking in front of Outwater that would make it harder for families to bring their kids there and enjoy the beautiful lakefront, and those impacts on the trees that both, change the face of our community as well as impact our ecosystem, against the very pragmatic thing about making safe areas for bikes. And, you've mentioned that there are very specific guidelines of what's, desired by the state, but when those do come at high costs, which limit access to a park and uprooting trees, how do you go about balancing those factors?
So that's a great question, Mike, I believe you said. We have to weigh in, we have to select an alternative that meets the purpose and need of the project. So like we had said, that's replacing the failing pavement. But, we have federal and state funding involved. So we need to design to their standards. That said, we realize that there are impacts to what's there today, whether it's the parking, the trees, the parkland, potentially, historic homes as well. So, that's why we're here, is to get feedback. And I think the feedback's going to play a role in the selection of this alternative, as well as cost and the impacts. So we do have flexibility to look at, using minimum standards or trying to justify things outside of the guidelines. But at this point, like Christine said, we're very early in the process, and we need to consider all options. It would be, it would be disrespectful to the process if we didn't consider desirable standards at this point, because we are so early in the process.
That makes a lot of sense.
I'm sorry. I actually have a question. So did I hear you correctly? You don't want the parking to be eliminated, and we want the bike lanes to be inserted or kept on the project segment. How are we going to do that if we don't consider these alternatives?
Sorry, what I meant to say was that, while I'm certainly in favor of bike lanes, I enjoy cycling. I think that the impact of losing trees or losing parking space, which does make it harder for people from the surrounding communities to enjoy the park, outweigh the benefits in general of that bike lane. But I guess more generally, given that this is a phase of collecting input, I just wanted to see how those impacts were weighed upon one another, and if there's any precedent or examples in the surrounding area of instances where things were not built to minimum criteria to maintain things such as trees or the ability for people to access a park outside of their own immediate vicinity.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Aaron, you've got a couple other hands up.
Yes, thanks, Lindsay. Holly.
Hi, this is Holly Gamblin. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi. Okay, just a couple things, and I will be filling out the survey and sharing these thoughts as well in print. But so I just want to mention a couple of details here. Number one, the impact of trees for actually calming traffic. We have a lot of residents who are concerned about the speed already, and there have been some very good suggestions made in the previous session about adding the flashers and adding some stop signs in key places. I think those are great things. But trees have also been linked to studies to show that it helps to calm the traffic. So I think an effort to preserve these trees for that reason alone should be given strong consideration. Second, with the trees, I also am in real estate, and so I think about property value. Mature trees do give an increased amount of property value to our homeowners that are along Lake Drive. I also am strongly concerned about the loss of the green space if we widen any of this and how that impacts many of our Lake Drive residents who are already in close proximity to Lake Drive. So I don't see that as a very positive move. And I'm glad that we have other options that you've proposed, and it looks like unanimously the village prefers an in-kind. I will be considering everything that you've proposed, but I would like for property value to be taken in strong consideration with our Lake Drive residents. We have very short driveways for some of these people. It's very dangerous pulling out safely so that our pedestrians are kept safe, as well as the residents and how they can navigate the traffic in and out of their own driveways. So that's all that I wanted to say. And again, I'll be putting this all in the survey.
Thank you for sharing, Holly.
You're welcome.
Allison, yeah, your hand is up.
Yes, hello.
Hello.
Am a resident. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I'm a resident on Lake Drive, somewhat close to Atwater Park. And I would like to basically second everything that Holly mentioned. And a big thing for us is the traffic, the thought of the trees and how it slows traffic down. But a big concern of mine is removing parking from Lake Drive. I feel like it's going to allow that to be like a 60-mile-an-hour just freeway. We already battle people bobbing and weaving. The crosswalks are very unsafe. People overtaking other cars on the shoulder is very concerning for us living right here. Capitol and Atwater, Capitol and Lake is an extremely dangerous intersection. And the short driveways is a big concern. If there's land taken away, I will not be able to park my truck in the driveway. Much less, anyone here who has landscapers, who has anybody, where do we park otherwise? There's already like jammed parking on all the side streets. So then we'll have landscapers or whomever crossing Lake Drive to get to the residences on the east side of the street. But safety first and foremost is my concern. And I don't feel like opening it up will be the best thing for Lake Drive and for the residents here and the kids. It's already like playing Frogger crossing the street here. And as Holly said, she was very correct in saying that backing out of the driveway already is unsafe. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Allison. Holly, I see you have your hand up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing. I've had the privilege of living on Lake Drive on both the west side and the east side, all right there around Atwater Park. And it's a fantastic work for our village, and it's really wonderful that other people in the city or all over other communities and even out of state want to come and enjoy that park. I would have to say that hold on, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna have to come back to you in 1 second. Hold on. I'm so sorry. Hold on.
So until Holly join us back, I know a lot of people may leave because it's already 7 o'clock and it's the time to end this presentation. If anyone is not able to stay on the call, please, 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 it's very important for you to fill the survey. Very, very important for us to hear your feedback. If you cannot do it now during the meeting, please, you have the contact information on the screen in front of you. Email us, call us, whatever works for you. Please do so. It's very important in the decision-making process. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. I apologize. So I'm having to juggle something else with. Anyway, so the point is that I lived on the west side when we had 4 open lanes of traffic actively going north, or 2 going north and 2 coming southward. Then the village did resurfacing and narrowed that so that we had 1 lane north, 1 lane south. It had a positive impact on the flow of traffic. It actually made where the crosswalks were painted on easier to at least have a visual and utilize those crosswalks to get the attention of drivers passing through. So there were improvements, but I think the perspective of our residents needs to be strongly weighed by WISDOT. And I'm glad that in the last session you just made the addition to your flow chart of including the trustees and all of this feedback weighing in heavily, and then also the documentation and the reporting back so that we can have another session.
Thank you, Holly. Allison, I see your hand up again.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add that, I really hope that it's weighed in very heavily, the residents of the community. I very much love that our inclusiveness of Shorewood, and I don't want that to change with the park and the beach and everything. But I think it's very important that we first and foremost consider the residents here. Because if we don't take care of the foundation, it all crumbles. And we live here. We live 10 houses away. All of us who live around and live on Lake Drive experience this every single day. And we do deal with, I love living here. I love our community. But we deal with a lot living here on Lake Drive and close to the park. And I really hope that that's really taken into consideration in this thought process. And, the safety of our kids, which I don't feel has been taken into consideration, on Lake Drive, period. There's no signage by the park as kids at play. There's nothing to slow traffic down, as opposed to Whitefish Bay on Lake Drive. It's been very thoughtfully planned, and I would love to see some of that considered for our village, especially the intersection of Capitol and Lake, the lighting as well for the evening at that intersection.
Absolutely, Allison. We definitely encourage you to submit these comments. And of course, this meeting is recorded, so they are on the record. For the sake of time, since we are over, Erin, do you want to, or Christine, do you want to wrap up any comments?
I posted a couple comments in the chat box here since Kathy was asking when are the results of the survey will be shared with the public. So I mentioned in the chat box, so once we have this survey data completed and we make sure we have all the accurate data, maybe 30 to 60 days from today, maybe 40 to 60 days from today, we'll be able to share data if requested. The official sharing with the public would be via the second public informational meeting. So there are 2 ways to get them: either contact us directly or await the next public informational meeting to share that information. That being said, is there anyone else who needs a question right away answered today? If not, again, you have the contact information on the screen in front of you. Take a picture with your phones or write it down, whatever works for you. And feel free to call us, email us whenever you feel like it, and then we'll answer your question.
We do have Nina's hand was up again. I think that was Mike. Are you still on?
Yeah, I am still on. I just wanted to kind of echo, Holly and Allison. We're also on Lake Drive, and one of the things that does happen very frequently is that drivers turn around in the driveway bibs, and it's a busy road, and I understand people need to get around, but we're a neighborhood of young families. There's little kids riding up and down the sidewalks all the time, and any shortening of these bibs with cars kind of whipping in and out of the front of the driveways, I do think poses a safety risk. And again, to emphasize that I'm very much in favor of the in-kind replacement as well, because Atwater Park is something viewed as a great thing by people in the surrounding community. Shorewood has consistently stood up to prevent any limitation of people from being at Atwater Park. And eliminating the trees, eliminating the scenery, eliminating parking is just so antithetical to our neighborhood and the community that I think that you really can't support a scenario where the beauty of this landscape is destroyed in favor of bike lanes.
Thanks for that, Mike. Aaron, you want to say any closing remarks?
I appreciate everyone joining the call and weighing in. That's why we're here. We want to hear what you liked and what you don't. And, for some of you, it's very obvious. And we thank you for that. Again, visit the website. I encourage you to do that. All the exhibits are on there. And should you have additional questions, our contact information has been on the screen for, I think, the last 30 minutes. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to meet up.
Before we wrap up, I just want to thank you, Aaron and Lindsay, for doing such a great job. I really appreciate it and very happy working with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. And again, this will be recorded or has been recorded and will be on the website if you want to watch it. Just give us a couple days to get it up there. Thanks again.
Thank you.